Alright, this is a podfic of What Should Have Been and What Was by Elf Wren. The summary for chapter 1 is Dick stared at the bottle in his hand, mind everywhere but in the moment. He just couldn't stop thinking about Bruce, about Jason, about his failures. He could almost replay his father's words, filled with poison and hatred. "It should have been you," he said, and Dick couldn't blame him. After all, he knew it should have been him too. Or, after reading AU 79, my mind couldn't stop thinking of what would have happened if Dick had taken Bruce's words more seriously. That was the summary for chapter 1, so let's get into it. Dick stared at the bottle in his hand, mind everywhere but in the moment. He just couldn't stop thinking about Bruce, about Jason, about his failures. He could almost replay his father's words, filled with poison and hatred. "It should have been you," he said, and Dick couldn't blame him. After all, he knew it should have been him, too. If he had been there for him, the kid, Jason. If it wasn't for Dick, Jason would still be alive, with his huge grin and his bubbly personality. "He is a better Robin than you ever were," Dick's demon whispered. He was, he corrected, words whispered into an empty apartment. Dick knew what he had to do. He had convinced himself this was the only way, after nights filled with nightmares, with his little brother's pleas for mercy. He knew there was only one way to finally rest. Dick opened the bottle of whiskey and took a big gulp. He drank and drank, hating the taste, but forcing himself through it. He finally removed the bottle from his lips and realized he had taken half the content. Dick put the bottle on the counter and took out the pill bottle, his special medication that he took to sleep from time to time. He unscrewed the bottle and put a handful of his pills in his hand. He exhaled slowly and lifted the hand to his mouth in a quick move. Dick then took the whiskey and took a swig of it, using the amber-like liquid to swallow the handful of pills. After swallowing every pill, he drank the rest of the whiskey and discarded the bottle, putting it in the trash can. He made his way to his bedroom, wondering who would find him. Probably his landlord, after receiving complaints about the smell. Then she would have to open the door with her spare key just to discover the lifeless body of her weird tenant. He felt so bad for her, but not bad enough to stop or to call for help. He only hoped that she would not be traumatized for life. Finally, reaching his room, Dick opened the door to a messy room, filled with the clothes everywhere and the trash on the floor. He knew it was a disgusting sight, but he could not care less. Feeling extremely tired, he laid down on his incredibly uncomfortable bed and closed his eyes. He was ready to see Daj, his dad, and his little brother again. Donna knocked on the door for the third time, getting more worried by the second. She had not seen Dick in the last 3 days, and he had not answered any of her calls or texts. She knew Wally, Roy, and Garth had the same luck, so after speaking with the other 3, she had made the decision to come to visit. Wally, Roy, Garth, Raven, and Corey all wanted to be here too, but Donna had insisted to come alone first, to not make her friends feel concerned. Since a good 3 minutes had passed without Dick opening the door, Donna reached a rash but necessary decision. She would open this door, no matter the cost. So after checking if anyone was watching her, she took a step back and kicked the door with enough strength to open it, but not completely break it. A loud bang was heard through the entire hallway, so Donna quickly entered the apartment and closed the door behind her, or, well, tried to. Not sparing the door more time, she started to scan the living room, her eyes watching the mess in said place. She didn't take long before noticing the open and empty whiskey bottle and the empty pill bottle beside it. Her heart started to beat more quickly, and she felt a horrible feeling in her stomach. She started running to the bathroom first and opened the door as quickly as she could. At that moment, she felt faster than the Flash himself. After realizing that Dick was not there, she made her way into the bedroom just as fast. She opened the bedroom door and saw Dick laying down on his bed, looking peaceful. She noticed he was breathing rather slowly, almost too slow. She fell towards him, shouting his name. She took him into her arms and began shaking him and shouting at him, begging him to open his eyes. He was unresponsive. Only after she slapped him did he start to show any signs of being alive. Donna felt like she could breathe again when she saw his blue eyes. But she knew that her mission was not yet over. She laid Dick on the floor softly and approached the window. Without hesitating, she broke it. After making sure the whole window was uncovered, she took him in her arms and flew out of there, knowing exactly where to go, the nearest hospital. Alright, that was chapter 1. Now let's get into chapter 2. The summary for chapter 2 is: Bruce felt hollow, empty after losing his son. He, a man who was once full of hope and optimism, couldn't seem to see the light at the end of the tunnel. He felt, not for the first time, like giving up. What was the point of his mission on his war against crime if his son had been the one to suffer? Alright, that's the summary. Let's get into the chapter. Bruce felt hollow, empty after losing his son. He, a man who was once full of such hope and optimism, couldn't seem to see the light at the end of the tunnel. He felt, not for the first time, like giving up. What was the point of his mission on his war against crime if his son had been the one to suffer? Jason, so full of light, so full of hope and compassion. Jason, who claimed that Robin gave him magic. Jason, his son. Bruce couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. He had to make them all pay. Make the Joker pay for what he did to his son. He couldn't care less for his well-being. He was a father on a path of vengeance, and nothing and no one would stop him. His phone rang for the third time in less than 10 minutes, and once again he pressed hang up button, not wanting to deal with anyone. He didn't have time for distractions. He directed his attention to the computer in front of him, ready to continue with his research. He faintly heard the phone upstairs ringing. He could almost hear Alfred's footsteps, with the cave so silent, empty of the laughter and joy it once held. Bruce shook his head slightly, not wanting to lose himself in those thoughts again. He forced himself to concentrate. So lost in his work, he didn't realize Alfred had come down in a hurry, only noticing his presence when the man spoke up. "Master Bruce, I'm afraid your presence is needed," Alfred said, his voice filled with worry. "We got a call from—" "Not now, Alfred. Whatever it is, it's not important as this," Bruce interrupted, annoyance with the sudden intrusion. Why couldn't Alfred see how important his work was? "The hospital called," Alfred said, his voice louder than what was normal. "Dick has been submitted to the hospital for attempted suicide." With that, Bruce finally spun around, looking at Alfred with fear evident on his face. "Seeing as you are still in his emergency contacts, they tried to call you first. But when no one answered, they called the second emergency contact, which was thankfully me," the older man continued explaining, with a clear vibe of disapproval towards Bruce. Bruce stood up from his chair and started to sprint towards the Batmobile, fear clouding his judgment. "Master Bruce," Alfred shouted, making the other man stop in his tracks, and turned his head, with irritation and confusion clear on his face. "You are still wearing your armor, and you cannot go in the Batmobile. Batman cannot visit Dick at the hospital. Bruce Wayne, however, is expected to make an appearance." It was until that moment that Bruce realized his mistake and nodded, once before jogging to remove his suit. Once Bruce was presentable enough to go out, he then hurried upstairs and out, where Alfred was already waiting inside of his Kongisig car. Sorry, I don't know how to pronounce that. Bruce stepped inside the car, not even questioning Alfred, about the choice when he already knew it was the fastest car they had. Alfred started the car and began driving towards Bloodhaven in complete silence. Bruce appreciated the silence since it gave him space to think. He knew it was his fault that his boy had tried to kill himself. His voice replayed in his head. "It should have been you," he said. And what a mistake that had been. How could he ever say such words to his son, his first kid, his first Robin? He had been blinded by rage and grief, and he had taken it out on his own child. That was the real reason he was alone, Bruce thought, because he only hurt those he loved. He drove them away with his temper. He had to fix this, but how could he? How do you fix such a huge mistake? He knew, right there, that his mission of revenge had been an error. So full of anger, he had directed his attempts of wanting to harm those who had harmed instead of protecting those he loved. They could have died, and it was all his fault. So lost in his head, already making plans and contingencies, Bruce hadn't realized the car had finally stopped. The 1.5 hours had passed by so fast. Once he realized he was already outside of some not-so-good-looking hospital, he got out of the car as fast as he could. He hadn't even closed the door completely, and Alfred was already driving off, looking for somewhere to park the car. Bruce ran to the receptionist, not caring about how it might look. "Where's Richard John Grayson?" he demanded to the receptionist, who gave him a tired look but directed him towards his son's room. He didn't even thank her before running to his son's room, his heart beating faster than one of a pygmy shrew could. He opened the door, his hands slightly shaking. Once it was opened, he finally saw his only remaining child. Dick was on the bed, his face looking paler than ever. He was hooked on some machines, but Bruce paid no attention to that. He only had eyes for his son. Dick's eyes remained closed, not giving any sign of life, but he could see his chest rise and fall with every breath he took, so he knew he was alive, weak, but alive. Okay, that was Chapter 2 and Part 1 of What Should Have Been and What Was. Part 2, which is the last part, it'll be Chapters 3 and 4, it'll come out next Monday. Alright, bye.